If the Bible's got you tied in knots, if you're burdened with religious thoughts, come grab a drink and join the choir. It's Heretic Happy Hour.
All right, everybody, how you doing? It's Keith. I am joined by special guest. I'm going to bring on in just a minute. Matthew DiStefano will not be with us today. I don't think he might surprise us and jump in, but he is currently, I think, coming back home from Las Vegas, where he spent Thanksgiving with some friends. So it's just me today, and I decided to bring on a friend. You may know who he is. It's Darrell Epp. But I'll introduce him and bring him on in just a second. I got to do a little housekeeping first, though. We have a sponsor, and we're very, very proud of that and very excited to have a sponsor. Religionless Studios is a progressive Christian video Bible commentary on YouTube. Every single Sunday, the channel will move verse by verse through the text to comprehensively and compassionately interpret the Bible through the lens of liberation theology. In addition to the YouTube channel, Religionless also has devotionals, study guides, and a Discord community, all accessible through their Patreon. You can subscribe to the YouTube channel at youtube.com/@religionless, and we recommend that you do because they're kind of cool. All right, and so without further ado, I'm bringing on my special guest today, Darrell Epp.
Hello.
Darrell, hey, how you doing?
Pretty good. How are you?
Doing very good. Very, very good. Good to see you.
Excellent.
So for people who don't maybe not know exactly who you are, give us a real brief kind of like background. Who are you? What do you do?
Well, right now I'm at the western tip of Lake Ontario. And that's where I've been for a long time. And I write mainly poetry. I've been doing that for a while. And my 6th poetry collection was published by Choir this year. And it's called Alien Phonics Primer. And yeah, that's where it's at. That's my thing.
Yeah, very, very cool. And I think you're actually currently working on your next poetry book as well, right?
Yeah, I guess it'll be out next summer. And I can't imagine this would be interesting to anyone in the world but me, but I've written poems in all different shapes. And then one day I wrote a poem that had 24 lines long, and I looked at the shape of it, and it just really pleased me. So I just thought, what if I did a series of poems that were 24 lines long? What if I did like 10 books of 90 24-line poems? Maybe that would add up to something.
Yeah.
So that's kind of what I'm committed to now.
Okay. So where are you at progress-wise in that?
Well, I've got almost the first 3 of the 9 done, I guess you might say.
Okay.
So it's a good formal restriction to have. Like poetry is perfect where poetry is perfect because if you're not concise, it just looks wrong and smells wrong and anyone can tell. So it's a really good way to sharpen your thinking and improve your life in every way except financially. And you know the old joke about how like, oh, I can't write, I don't have anything to say. And like, that's not, like that's never stopped me from writing, that's for sure. And it's all backwards, where you don't think about something and then write, but you think by writing.
Right.
And
yeah, that's good. Well, see, yeah, is that kind of like the cure for like writer's block? Because I think a lot of times, right? I think a lot of writers, that's kind of what holds them back, is sort of like they sit down and like, well, I don't have anything to say, so I'm not going to write. Instead of like start writing, and then things will happen, right? It's kind of like you have to put the thing in motion first.
Well, it's funny. One answer to that is back in the day when I was doing writers' workshops, trying to help aspiring writers, whenever they said, "What about writer's block?" Um, uh, I'd say there's an easy cure for writer's block. If you ever think you have writer's block, like there were years in my life when I didn't write, and it wasn't writer's block. I wasn't writing. I was doing other things. So
Right.
what, right? But if you really think you have writer's block, there's an easy cure for that. Write about dad, because no matter who you are, it doesn't matter who you are, you have an endlessly baffling, for better or for worse, you have an endlessly baffling, profound, endlessly haunting relationship with dad.
Right.
So if you have, so I'm telling you, if you have writer's block, write about dad. Problem
Yeah.
solved.
Yeah.
Right?
There you go.
Seriously.
Yeah.
Um, Also, they say write what you know. Well, it's like one interesting thing as I'm aging. I find I know less and less. Where
Right.
where like I don't know anything. So what, right? Just like uh, start like collecting impressions you have. Try to like shuffle the deck, and like don't wait till you think you're an expert. Good
Yeah.
lord.
Yeah. Good point. Yeah, I think that's right. I've heard it's so funny because, like, I pay attention to a lot of different writers, and a lot of writers that I like all have sort of differing advice. So I've heard writers say the whole thing. Of course, that's the kind of the main thing is write what you know, and
Right.
I think what they mean, and I heard that when I was taking courses in college on creative writing, was stick to what you know. And I think what they were trying to say is sort of write out of your personal experience. I think that's really what they mean. To put your personal experiences on the page, right? Your thoughts, your feelings, conversations you've had with friends, things that you've been through, and they don't have to be. It doesn't have to be like a diary, but as you're writing a story about a detective or whatever, you can pull in those personal details that are real, and sort of make what you're writing about, whatever you're writing about, a little bit more realistic. That's how I've kind of turned that around. Is sort of like, in other words, like it's not like, well, I've never been a private eye, so I can't write a detective story. Um, I think if that was true, then most there wouldn't be any detective stories, because most detectives don't sit around writing stories. Um, but I think that's what that means. I mean, do you agree with that?
Well, I push back on a few things there. On the one hand, Dashiell Hammett, who basically set the template for private eye stories, he was in fact a private eye,
Okay.
working as a detective for the Pinkerton Agency before he started writing. And basically, when people say write what you know, what they're trying to say oftentimes is they're talking about authenticity.
Right. That's what I
And
mean.
yeah, so basically, if you watch The Wild Bunch, the movie, um, Sam Peckinpah's grandparents were literal pioneers
Mhm.
who literally helped build that area around Fresno, and he was literally putting horseshoes on horses before kindergarten,
Wow.
and one of the Wild Bunch was an actor named Ben Johnson who won the Oscar for The Last Picture Show, directed by Peter Bogdanovich.
Mm.
And before he ever acted in a movie, he was a professional trick rider in the rodeo.
Wow.
And there's a cowboy movie with John Wayne where Ben Johnson, 30 years earlier, he actually rode two horses at once with one foot on each horse.
Wow.
Um, so then, all the people who are playing in the Wild Bunch, their skin's very leathery because they spent too much time in the sun, and they
Yeah.
grew up around horses and all that stuff. So, also Sam Peckinpah was one of the best loopers in history. Where when he watched the first cut of the Wild Bunch, he noticed every gunshot sounded the same, which,
Yes.
which was normal in movies.
Yeah, you
Okay,
just have one sound effect and you just keep using it over and over again.
right. So he said, "My God, this rifle doesn't sound like the Smith and Wesson 1911 pistol." So he went back and looped in all the authentic sounds of the guns from different lengths of barrels, things like that.
Yeah.
Um, Also, the movie he made before the Wild Bunch, Major Dundee, that was the first time Warner Brothers had made a movie where the natives were natives from the actual tribe in that area.
Oh, cool.
As opposed to just like Ricardo Montalban with some shoe polish on his face or something.
Right.
So
Yeah.
so that's
Yeah.
that's called authenticity, right? Where it's
Yeah.
like I love cowboy movies, but I'm not a cowboy, right? Uh,
Right.
so the lesson there isn't to imitate, but to find out what you can be as authentic about as Ben Jonson and Sam Peckinpah could be about horses, right?
Right. Right. So
And
like, so if you were to write as an author, a Western or detective story or science fiction story, whatever you're writing, the advice is make it as authentic as you can make it, right? Pull in your experiences, your human story into whatever you're writing.
sure, and also it may take a while, right, to
Yeah.
find out who you are and what your thing is. But basically, it comes down to what are you obsessed about? Like
Yeah.
the way that, you know, like John Hughes had a thing for like comedies, and Alfred Hitchcock had a thing for suspense. What's your thing, right? So
Yeah.
now, after I published a bunch of books, I can look back and say, oh, it turns out I have these obsessions, right?
Right.
And you know. Um, my narrator happens to be someone who lives in Hamilton and wanders around bumping into strange people, and somehow that becomes a metaphor for the culture at large, and that's my thing, right?
Yes. There you go.
So also, if you crassly try to say, "Oh wow, this is the hot thing this year," I will try to copy the success of someone else. That never works. Just like there's some
Yeah.
sort of karmic law where it just doesn't happen, right?
Yeah.
And a good example of that, there was a series called Mortal Instruments, which was a book, and then they made it into a movie, and they were so confident in the movie, they filmed the sequel at the first time they were making the first one. And
Wow.
then this movie came out and it totally tanked because what happened was the collective, like the culture at large, rightly or wrongly, smelled it and said, well, wait a minute. This is just a sort of Twilight Zone knockoff where you're trying to capture that same lightning in a bottle thing that made Twilight, not Twilight Zone, Twilight, right?
Got
Uh,
it. Oh, Twilight, the
yes,
the
yeah,
vampire werewolf thing. Yeah.
yeah. So people just smelt it and said, "Wait a minute, this feels like you're just trying to like hitch your wagon to the success of Twilight somehow."
Like a
Where it's
parody or something. Yeah.
yeah, and whether that was fair or not, that's what happened. They said
Right.
this doesn't feel authentic. This feels like trying to catch that bandwagon, so it tanked, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So if you try to have a hit, life just doesn't work that way. Whenever someone has a huge hit, right, that's an anomaly, right? And you'll drive yourself nuts thinking about it. So just be
Right.
you. Yeah.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, it can be tough. I mean, I'm currently writing a novel at the moment, and my only goal right now is just to write things that I'm interested in, things that entertain me. Like we're like it's sort of like write the book you wish somebody you could read. That no one's written the book that I'm writing, so I'm writing it, and my only audience is myself. I want to write something that keeps my attention and kind of goes to places that I want to go and that kind of thing. And then there's this thing about writing a novel as well. And you taught people these kinds of things, so I'm curious what you think about this. But my goal is, I think I've heard this, I've seen this quote that says something like, "How to write a great novel in 2 steps. Step 1, write a crappy novel. Step 2, fix it." So I'm in stage 1 of writing the crappy novel, knowing that it's crappy, knowing like it's no one's ever going to see this, but I just get the ideas on the page, get the words on the page, get the dialogue on the page, the story beats and everything, just kind of get it out and on the page, beginning, middle, end. Then I can go back and do the rewriting, and that's where hopefully the magic happens.
Yeah. I think Somerset Maugham once said there are 3 rules to novel writing. The only problem is no one knows what they are.
That's good. I
Yeah.
like that. I
Yeah.
like it.
So sure, like, and also the problem isn't writing a bad novel. The tragedy wouldn't be if your novel was bad. The only tragedy would be if you didn't write a novel. Like, if you write
Right.
a novel that's bad, this is my opinion. At the very least, you did something nobody else could do, right? Like when you talk to
Yeah.
your coworkers and say, "What do you do?" and they say, "I binged watched season 7 of the same thing everyone else watches," right?
Yeah.
Like, like you. like that's not really being alive. Like you did something anyone could do, right?
Yeah.
So if you write a book about something that you believed in, regardless of merit for the moment, you did
Yeah.
something no one else can do, which is a great celebration of being alive, right?
Yeah.
So that's where it's at. Yeah, just to do it. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's exactly right. And I'm trying to do that. It's funny how much self sort of criticism and like almost like anxiety. I don't know if I would say anxiety, but it's kind of like that. I mean, for example, I was talking to my wife Wendy about this. Like I've written like what 11, 12 different sort of nonfiction theology books and commentaries and things like that. And I never have a problem with that. Like I never have self-doubt when I sit down to write, a book about a commentary on the Gospel of Thomas or something, right? Or a book about, researching the doctrine of hell throughout church history. Like I never sit down at the computer and at the laptop and the keyboard and say, "Oh, I don't know, can I do this? I don't know. Maybe I'm not good enough." Like I just sit around and I do it, right? One chapter at a time, boom, 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 and I'm done. And but for some reason, writing fiction, I'm constantly dealing with this little voice in my head that's saying things like that. Like, you've never done this before. You don't know what you're doing. No one's going to want to read this. You know what I mean? Like all those kind of like self-doubt and kind of like those little things coming in my head. And that never happens with nonfiction. But with fiction, it's like it's like that's a bigger part of the battle, really, to sit down at the keyboard and write is to kind of undo all of that and to argue back and push back against all that kind of thinking. That's been the most challenging thing. So I don't know. What do you think about that kind of stuff? Do you ever have those kind of thoughts?
Not anymore. That problem is totally fixed for me. Like it's all over. Where I remember being young, I actually hesitated writing because I thought, what if I actually try to take my shot and get in the ring and I'm not good, right? I fail, right? What if, right? And that life's too short. That's all over, right? And if someone wants to, there's a quote from President Theodore Roosevelt where he said, "It is not the critic who counts," and it basically says, "What matters is if you get in the ring and you take a risk, you take a chance of getting bloody and beaten, right? You tried, right? And there'd always be some Homer Simpson guy on the couch saying how you should have done it."
Right.
It doesn't matter. What matters is you get in the ring. Also about the last thing you said, the great thing about writing is it's not binary. Like plumbing is binary, where if you hire a plumber to fix your sink, you want him to fix your sink. And there's no, like either he does or he doesn't. But there are different kinds of writing where Nabokov had a different writing style than Ernest Hemingway did. And you don't have to necessarily prefer one or the other, although I do. But that's life, right? And there are writers I know that you like that I don't like.
Right. Like Philip K. Dick?
Yeah. When I'm king and I'm in charge of the world, I will fix that. I will.
How will you fix that? He's like, take his books out of print or something?
Maybe I shouldn't say at this point until I consolidate my power. But yeah, horrible writer, horrible.
Okay.
But the thing is, so let's say you write a book and it's in a certain style that isn't everyone's cup of tea, right? I'm telling you, I'm not going to shoot you. So what?
Right.
There's no downside. Just do it. I'm telling you, just do it.
Yeah. No, I like that. And I also like I love that quote that you were talking about. I came across it first through Brene Brown, and she was sort of paraphrasing his quote about, all that matters is the person who's actually in the ring with me getting their ass kicked.
Yeah.
And she used it in the terms of like dealing with criticisms from people, right? People leaving comments on the blog post or the YouTube, post or whatever. And like you said, sort of like the Homer Simpson guy in the corner saying, "Yeah, you should have done it that way." And you should have, the guy who's never done anything in his life. Right. Like, show me. Oh, well, thank you for telling me how I should have written this article. Can you show me your article on this topic? I'd love to see how you've researched this and you've gone through it. Well, of course they haven't. Right. Yeah. They just want to be exactly. And so like recognizing the voices of those people don't mean anything. I mean, what the voices that matter are the ones that are actually kind of like in there with you doing it. They're getting bloody. They're getting dirty, in the arena.
Yeah.
They're not sitting in the stands sort of like, armchair quarterbacking.
Yeah, so that person you were talking to, that's a fair point because the first time you actually get online criticism from someone, it's
Yeah.
kind of amazing how much that can hurt,
Oh
you
yeah.
know, and how much it can bug you when it shouldn't, but it just does, right? That's life, right?
Yeah.
But you just have to get like past it. And seriously, like if you want to go through life without ever being criticized, I'll tell you the secret.
Yeah.
Don't do anything. If you waste your life like Homer Simpson
Yeah.
on the couch, just being a spectator your whole life,
Yeah.
you'll never be criticized,
Right.
right? But your life will just flash by and be over, and not and it'll be a life not worth remembering, and just go
Yeah.
by in a flash. So if
Yeah.
you never want to be criticized, just don't do anything. You know?
That's right.
Yes,
That's exactly right.
yeah, it's crazy. Like I'm telling you, just like go for it. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I look forward. I look forward as a writer of fiction, getting to the place where all of those voices are silenced, and I don't deal with any of that. I can just sit down and write. Um, so I guess it just takes practice. Like one thing that's really helped me. I don't know if you've read this book, but this book really helped me a lot. It's by Rick Rubin. It's called The Creative Act: A Way of Being. So I've read it now, I think through like twice, and it's got just it's amazing because it's not just about the creative process. His thing is that everyone's creative, because your creativity doesn't have to be writing or painting or music or anything like that. In some ways, being creative is just using your mind, your imagination to solve problems and stuff. But he talks about all those kind of things that we're talking about, right? Like that self-doubt and asking those questions, and I've kind of gone down the checklist pretty much of everything he covers in the book, of like as you're creating something, thinking, will anybody like this, right? And he's like, who cares, right? You're not doing it for those people. And if you are, then you're doing the wrong thing, right? You should be doing this because this makes you happy. You're doing this because this is something you want to do, that you almost have to do. And who cares if anybody sees it, right? There's nothing even that says anyone ever has to see it, right? You could just write it for yourself, for your own amusement, your own enjoyment, and then put it away, right? And then do something else. But so I think it's helped me because I have gone through those lists of things like, is anyone going to like this? And just like saying, it doesn't matter if anyone else likes it. I don't really care. You need to get really to the place where you really don't care if anyone likes it or not, as long as you do. If you write it and you love it and it's something you're excited about and you're happy with and you look at it and you're proud of what you did and no one else liked it, that's okay.
Well, it's funny. Also, writing a book does take a certain kind of energy that is kind of hard to explain to people who haven't done it. And for me, the fuel that keeps you going is, I guess you might say the word obsession, where it's so easy not to write a novel. You can just do something else and just time goes by and then you're 10 years older, right?
Yeah.
So basically with like my books, I guess in some sense, I do this, spooky or wacky idea about the writers who I admire, like Shakespeare, Cervantes. I kind of think like I want to join their fraternity, their guild, and sort of be on their team. So I sort of, when I'm writing, I'm thinking this is what culture should be focused on instead of the Kardashians or Philip K. Dick or whatever it is.
Okay, you're putting Philip K. Dick in the same category as the Kardashians. I feel like shots have been fired here.
Yeah. Two things I don't get. Yeah. So your obsession is your best friend, right? Where that's really happened to me, right? And then people after the fact's like, wow, Darrell, it turns out blah, blah, blah. I'm like, yeah. Well, if that wasn't the case, I literally wouldn't have had the energy to do the book, right?
Right.
And
yeah, that's good. Yeah. Well, along those lines, we have a comment from someone watching here, Doa Deer. Yeah. And they have a question for you. Darrell, I was told in school I should write. Is age 71 too late to try to write for an audience other than myself?
Okay, that's a great question. And this is something, this is something I actually have a strong opinion about. Okay. If you're dead, then it's too late. Like it's too late. Okay. But literally, if you're not like 6 feet under and you're not dead, it is not too late. And today is the day. Um, so no, go for it. Also, the funny thing, being 71 is awesome, right?
Yeah.
It's like, who has better stories, an 18-year-old or a 71-year-old? Like, you have
Right.
way better stories, right?
Right.
Also, the great thing about writing is it's not ballet. If your dream is to be a great ballerina like Rudolf Nureyev and you're 30 and it hasn't happened, it's never going to happen.
Yeah.
But writing isn't like that. And for example, uh, Robinson Crusoe, Gulliver's Travels, and Don Quixote were written by senior citizens.
Hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you can't write a great, and in my opinion, you can't write a great novel in your 20s because you haven't been kicked around by life enough.
Right.
Um, and I do take it serious in the sense, like an anesthesiologist gets paid more than the surgeon because it's a really tricky business, and you don't want an anesthesiologist who's like 18 or 28 or 38. You want one who's been doing it for 40 years, and you want to have an anesthesiologist where it's his first day. But no, if you're 71, there's no way that's a negative. That's a positive.
Yeah, I agree. And there's like a famous quote, and I was just looking for it when you were talking, and I thought it was some famous writer who said it, but I can't find it who's attributed to it. But it's one of those truisms, I guess, or those sayings that says no one should write a novel before they turn 50, kind of for the reasons that you're saying, right? You haven't lived enough life yet. Now, it doesn't mean, I guess, you could still write a novel. Sure. I mean, I've read novels from people that wrote, I think, good novels in their 20s, but probably if you keep reading, they've written better novels in their 40s and 50s.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. Like one example is that this is funny because I just finished reading this. I don't know how you feel about William Gibson, but I loved William Gibson's novel, his first novel, Neuromancer, which I read. I think he wrote it. I think he was probably in his 20s. But I read it like in the 90s. Literally, I think I finished reading it like a few weeks before The Matrix, the film, came out.
Right.
And I'm watching The Matrix in the theater thinking he should sue these guys because they just ripped off his novel.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I love that novel, and it's still amazing. It's an amazing, groundbreaking novel. And then he wrote several novels after that. They were good. They were okay. But he wrote another novel, I think in like 2000, 17 maybe? No. Like 2012 or 2013, something like that, called Pattern Recognition. And so, now he's aged like 20 something years, and it's way better. Oh my gosh. It's fantastic. It's just such a great novel. And so they're both great novels. But you'd almost not know that they were both written by the same person, right? It's just so much different. The style is different. The observations are different. Just everything about it is different. And so, yeah, I know. I guess, you could start writing something in your 20s, but you're probably going to get the better thing. The better product will come later.
Well, it's funny. First off, I would just like to say an extra word of encouragement to the person who wrote that comment. I'm saying go for it. That's awesome.
Yeah.
And also, William Gibson was kind of in the right place at the right time with the whole cyber deal. Yeah. And it's funny. I read an interview with him one time where he said when his first book came out and people said, "Who are your influences?" He always said William S. Burroughs because William S. Burroughs had this cultural cachet of being an avant-garde, cool figure, and it was something to say, right? And when you said that, people knew what you meant. But then later in life, he admitted he actually learned more about novel writing from Len Deighton than from William S. Burroughs.
Oh, yeah. Wow. That's funny he said that.
Yeah. And it's funny because Len Deighton wrote Bomber and all these like spy thrillers.
SSBB is the one I remember.
Right on. Yeah. And if you say that in the 80s, it didn't sound as cool and hip as saying I'm into Naked Lunch and Nova Express and The Ticket That Exploded. But William Gibson, he actually knows his business and his craft, and he said, "Well, of course, I learned more about structure and novel writing from Len Deighton, right?"
Right.
And so William Gibson wasn't kidding. He didn't just want to be a flash in the pan, where he did his thing, right?
Yeah.
when Tender in the Night came out, it made F. Scott Fitzgerald as famous as Justin Bieber when he was 26.
Yeah.
And he couldn't handle it, drunk and like drank himself to death by the time he was 44, right? Where you like play the cards, you're an adult, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So we have another comment. Let me pull this one up here. This is from Martin Conrad Hagland. Martin says, as a part of my recovery from my TBI in 2019, I took up writing a memoir, tracing God's grace at various times throughout my life. It wasn't written to be published, but to be helpful to those closest to me. So yeah, there you go. Yeah, I think writing can be therapeutic, right, in that sense. So it doesn't always have to be like and I think this is part of it too. And Richard Rubin touches on this in the book, The Creative Act. The other thing that holds writers back quite often is this great? Is it good? Right.
Mhm.
And so you're already judging it as is it quote unquote great or not as you're writing it. And that can paralyze you. Like, well, what I just wrote wasn't quote unquote great. So I should just quit, or I should erase that and start over. And again, so I think that can also hold people back of like feeling like I'm writing something that has to be great. And if it's not, I shouldn't even bother. Because I think, again, it goes back to, you have to, at least for myself, I have to keep in mind this mindset of the first draft will suck, right? And this is what I tell writers a lot is, think of your favorite book. Doesn't matter what it is, right? Your favorite writer, your favorite book, nonfiction or fiction, doesn't matter. Just think about that book, right? And I tell you right now, I promise you, guarantee you, that the book that you read was not the first draft. It's probably the third or fourth or fifth draft of the story, right? You will never read the first draft of your favorite book. So, what you're writing in the beginning is the sort of crappy first draft. It's not very good. It's just putting stuff down on the page. But once it's created, then it exists. Now you can look at it and say, oh, that doesn't work. You can, okay, let's X that out. Or, hey, that doesn't go here, it goes there. What if instead of this, I did that, right? Now you can play with something. And that's where you're starting to kind of like play in the sandbox and create what hopefully will be the great book at the end. And that's true even for my nonfiction stuff. That happens all the time. I start off with an outline. I follow the outline as close as I can. Sometimes in the middle of writing it, I'm like, oh, this outline doesn't work. I'm not doing that. Next, I'm going to do this. But even after I've written that first draft, I read through it. My wife, Wendy, reads through it. She has notes. She has suggestions. I read through it. I rewrite things. I change things. I move things around. I delete things. That's really where the book gets written, right? Is in that sort of second phase. So don't let the fact that what you're writing in the moment isn't, at least by your estimation, it isn't quote unquote great. Don't let that hold you back.
Yeah, although on the other hand, I have to say, William Shakespeare, he once said, I never blotted out a line.
Whoa.
So William Shakespeare, everything you have from William Shakespeare ever is his first draft.
If you believe that. I mean, anyone can say that. I can say that.
Yeah. And if you read Henry IV, Part 1, you can tell that's the first time he actually plotted a play before writing it. And for him, a big part of the joy was the improvisational nature of his plays, where he would write as it was going along. And that was the thing he got a real kick out of. Yeah. But then for Henry IV, Part 1, he actually had a really tight structure. Also, the funny thing about asking yourself if it's great, first off, that's the thief of joy. And the thing is, that's not a question great writers ask, where Shakespeare or Cervantes, when they're writing, they never would ask that question. They would just say, this is who I am. This is what I do. Just do it. Right.
Yeah.
Treat it like a job. Like everyone has a job they have to do, and they don't stop because they have to worry about the meta. They just do it. Right.
Yeah, exactly. Well, so you touched on something right there that I want to ask you about, because I don't think we've talked about this before. Maybe we have. It doesn't matter. Okay. But again, thinking about writing novels specifically, different writers that I like have different advice, right? And so I've read some authors who will say things like, when you're going to write fiction, and I've even seen like webinars and from like famous novelists who make lots of money writing novels, best-selling authors. saying, okay, here's how to write your novel, right? Like Aaron Sorkin, for an example, right? He writes screenplays and stuff. And he's like, follow this template. You got to follow the hero's journey. You got to follow Aristotle's little thing. And it's every novel's got to be this and this and this and this. And you got to do blah, 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 blah. And you got to map it out ahead of time. But you need to know how that book ends before you write the first line, right? That whole thing. But then you have someone like Stephen King, who also has written hundreds of novels, best-selling novels, really great novels. And he says, if you write an outline and you know the end before the beginning, why write the book? Like he said, I would never even start writing if I knew how it ended. Like I have an idea, I have a concept, I have a character. I just start writing and then I figure it out as I'm going. And I'm excited where it takes me. And sometimes it goes places I don't even think it's going to go, right? And so those are two widely different sort of pieces of advice. So I'm curious what you think about that.
Well, it's funny. If I say I disagree with Aaron Sorkin, anyone can say, well, he is so much more successful than you. Like, who cares what you think, which is fair. But it just so happens, like, the whole, like no offense to Aristotle either, but the whole structure and the hero's journey, like, I think is really played out. And when Anton Chekhov started writing, his idea, he said very explicitly, was to have a story without good guys and bad guys, because he thought that whole idea about, I'm a good guy, the bad guy is out there, as opposed to the conflict being internal, an internal struggle. He said that was the problem. That was where the human race went wrong, right? And this whole idea that, violence is okay if the good guy does it, right? And it actually, like, the good guy comes to town and just kills all the bad guys, and okay, great, I guess, right? That's a huge problem, right?
Right.
And also just about structure. I was always a big believer, and like Tom Clancy is someone like that, where he has that tight structure, and I have no interest in that. And I was always a believer in the idea that if I'm surprised how my book turns out, there's a much better chance that the audience is going to be surprised.
Yes.
Where sometimes if it's outlined like that, and how like sometimes you know who the killer is before the movie's over.
Yes.
The drag, and even if it's a bit less conscious than that, if it just feels too neat, the big thing to remember, Henrik Ibsen won the Nobel Prize for Literature, and one day Anton Chekhov went to a production of his play The Doll's House, right?
Yeah.
Nobel Prize for Literature. And halfway through, Anton Chekhov turned to his brother and said, but real life isn't like that at all.
Right.
So it's like, I don't care if you have a Nobel Prize, this isn't how life works, right?
Exactly.
And you've had that experience of seeing a movie that cost $500 million, and then you're sitting in the theater and says, wait a minute, I don't buy it. How did he jump from the helicopter to the what? Right? So no, like, that's all crazy. Also, when it comes to outline and plot, if it's well done enough and it has an urgency and it's the novel you're supposed to be writing, you'd be surprised how much a little of that can really go a long way.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I don't know. I've it's tough for me, again, making this transition from nonfiction to fiction, because in my nonfiction, I am totally an outline guy, right? Yeah, I have to know, because again, I have a topic, I have a subject, I'm trying to prove something or teach something or whatever. And so, I've got to break it down and make sure I've got enough material to get from beginning to the end. So with fiction, it's tough because I really like sort of the Stephen King model of just start writing and see what happens, right? But then it's really tough, right? How do I know? How do I know that what I'm going to do is going to be anything, right? What's going to happen? So I've tried, and maybe I don't know if this is going to work or not, but I've tried more of like a hybrid. It's sort of like I kind of know basically where I think I want it to go, but as I'm writing it, in the act of writing it, if I'm surprised, if something is like, whoa, that's an interesting direction. Oh, this character is doing this now, like, to go with that, right? To not. In other words, the outline is loose, and it's sort of loose sort of guidelines, but it's not like iron rails that my train is running on, where it's like a track that I can't get out of. It's more of like a real loose sort of a guideline of like, I've marked these things out along the path, But if I discover another path, I'm taking it.
Well, also it depends. I'd have to ask how internal versus external is your novel. How much filmable action is there? How much running around does the guy actually do? How many plot points are there? How
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
one of the mysteries of life that great novels make horrible movies, and
Yes. Yes. Okay. Yes.
bad novels make great movies,
Yeah.
because great novels that you think, oh yeah, I want to make a movie. The best parts of it aren't filmable, and there's all
Yes.
sorts of bad movies that have bad novels that have three really kick-ass set pieces and a great ending, which is what a movie is,
That's
right?
right.
So um, if you're going to write that kind of novel, just to keep in mind, like the part you think is awesome, that's your favorite part. You could probably shave it down a lot more than you think, and just leave more gapping for the reader to fill in. And in that case,
Yeah.
you should remember uh, The Great Gatsby. The gag with The Great Gatsby was edited by Max Perkins, and Max Perkins made F. Scott Fitzgerald spend as much time editing it as he did writing it. Where what happened is F. Scott Fitzgerald, it wasn't even his first novel. He was already the most famous writer in America. So he writes The Great Gatsby, and then sends it to Max, and then Max said, and Max Perkins had him cut out 40% of it, right?
Wow.
Because in the first version, there was a huge backstory for Jay Gatsby,
Right.
and it was great writing by a great writer. And Max Perkins said, it doesn't matter.
Right.
And Max Perkins, the genius, he said, if you don't have that in there, and Jay Gatsby appears fully formed, and he's already haunted by you don't know what, it'll
Right.
make the whole thing feel like a fairy tale and like a timeless myth.
Yeah.
Okay, so you read this novel, and that novel was edited until it has the inevitability of a drunk guy in a bar pouring out his life story to you, and the mystery of Jay Gatsby. It's like a magician telling you how it does his trick. You don't want to know, and
That's
like
right.
you don't have to know, because you also have something that bothers you, some dream that didn't come true, something you
Yeah.
wish you could go back and fix, right?
Yeah.
So if you're writing that kind of novel, that's the best example of like Max Perkins saying you can lose 40% of this, and um, when the reader fills in that gap with his imagination, it'll go into the stratosphere, and it will be like a myth, like a legend.
Yeah. That's such great advice. It's so funny you said that because, again, going back to like I was reading Pattern Recognition and by Gibson, and I had the thought because I was also thinking about I put together sort of my own little personal top 10, top 20 list of novels that I read this year, right? So I read a bunch of novels and I was like trying to figure out which one's my favorites. And I noticed that they kind of fell into two categories. There were some novels I read that I really liked, and they were the kind of novels that as I was reading them, I'm thinking to myself, man, this would make a great TV show, or this would make a great movie, right? An example would be Dark Matter by Blake Crouch. I enjoyed the novel. It was really great. But the whole time I'm reading, I'm thinking this would make a great movie or a TV show. And by the time I finished it, like a few weeks later, I'm like, oh, it's on Apple TV. Yeah, it is it is a TV series. They made it. And then I
Wow.
watched the TV series, and it's pretty much the book on the screen. It's like I just read the screenplay pretty much. They actually made improvements to the story and the TV series. Actually, it felt like this was the second draft of the novel, right? Like he should have done this in the novel. These are things he thought through a little bit more for the TV series. But anyway, so that's one category, right? A book that you're reading, that as you're reading it, you're thinking, man, this would make a great TV show, a great movie. Versus another one, like to me, like Pattern Recognition falls in the other category, which is a great novel. But as I'm reading it, as I'm enjoying it and thinking this is a great novel, I'm thinking to myself, I can't imagine how they would ever make this into a movie, right? And that's the kind of thing you're talking about, where there's so much internal stuff happening that's so good and so rich and so it's what makes it great. But it's not the kind of thing you could film and put up on the screen, because actually if you took all of that out, really, I don't know if you've read Pattern Recognition, but if you took it all out, Pattern Recognition would be the dumbest movie.
Yeah.
It would just be like, that's it? That's all that happens? Right? Because you would lose all this stuff that's going on in each of these characters. And again, sort of like that baggage, that backstory, the emotion, the things that are going through their heads, the things they're feeling about, someone put a glass of water on the table and that reminded them of something.
Yeah,
Right.
absolutely.
But that's not going to happen in a movie, right?
Yeah, it's like Marcel Proust's, In Search of Lost Time isn't going to be a summer blockbuster anytime soon. But, it's a great novel, and that's fair, sure.
Yeah. Yeah. So then I guess it's sort of like you have to decide what kind of novel are you writing, right? Like, are you trying to write something that's just like, it's cool, it's entertaining, it's got a real simple, good guy, bad guy, plot points, interesting, cool action things, and get to the twist and boom, boom, boom. Wow, that's entertaining. That's great. And look, here's the thing. Those kind of novels will do very well today, right? People want those kind of things. Or you're wanting to write something that's like, I want to get more introspective. I want to dig down into this a little bit. I want to kind of press into the sort of the humanity, the human emotion of the story. And then I'm not going to care about that, right? But this is the problem. Like so many times nowadays, people are creating things thinking about, I want to pitch this to Netflix, right?
Yep.
That's part of the problem.
Right. And again, that's like me saying I want to win the lottery. It's all kind of a wash. And like the things that do get picked up by Netflix, it's such an anomaly. It's not in your best interest to sort of pin your hopes on that, and just be you, right? And about what you just said there. There's a writer named Richard Matheson who wrote for The Twilight Zone, and he wrote The Incredible Shrinking Man and I Am Legend.
Legend, yeah.
Yeah. And he's one of those all story guys where it's a page turner where you want to turn the page to find out what happens. And it's very suspenseful, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And everybody who wants to write should read him just to know what that is like and to know what a really well-built story is like that can motor. But with a lot of novels and stories, like you say, I'll be experiencing it and think, yeah, it's well done. It has this structure, but I don't care if the cop saves the day at the end. I don't care. I'd rather go for a walk, right?
Yeah.
And there are novels by John Cheever that I love where the plot is like one sentence and the rest is him describing the town, remembering his ancestors, remembering conversations from the past. And it just feels so full of life and it has this urgency to it. And it also just feels more unique, right? Like also with writing, it doesn't matter like how it's done matters more than what it is. Like just because someone already made a movie about a crime that doesn't work out or a bank robbery that falls apart. No, it doesn't matter. It matters how it's done, right?
Yes, exactly.
So just because a movie has a great structure, according to a screenwriting professor or Aaron Sorkin, doesn't mean I have to care, right?
Right.
And you've had that experience yourself where you're watching a well-made movie and you're like, I don't care what's for dinner,
right?
And that's the mystery, right?
Yes, yeah, that's right.
And then sometimes you read something that feels more real to you than your real life does,
Yeah, exactly. Doa Deer has a comment saying, writing is how I figure out what I actually think and believe when I don't really have a very good understanding of.
Yeah, that's like so true, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like writing is how you learn who you are, and that's how you learn what is on your mind, literally. Like I wake up in the morning, I look at the trees, I don't have any thoughts, then I start writing, say, oh yeah, it turns out this does bother me. I didn't think it bothers me. It does bother me, right? Go for it.
Yeah.
Right? But yeah, there's no downside to it for sure. Right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, along those lines too, someone recommended to me a novel. Well, so his name is Derek Raymond. I don't know if you've ever heard of this guy. He's a British writer, Derek Raymond. So he wrote a book called I Was Dora Suarez, which I think was apparently that was the one that was the big, I guess his biggest success. But I started with a novel. This is actually the one that was recommended to me. He Died with His Eyes Open. And apparently this guy's written a series of murder mysteries, I guess, detective stories, I should say. They're not really, well, I guess they're kind of murder mysteries, detective stories. It's all about the same investigator who's never named, which I think is fantastic. Like in the entire, I think there's like a 4-book series, and it's told first person. You never learn the detective's name, never, and then no one. So it's, but it doesn't matter, right? You're just reading it, and it's also like you were saying, it's more about the way it's written. It's the way the story is told, less than the story that's told. Because I really enjoyed the book. He Died with His Eyes Open. It was very enjoyable. The way it was written, I really like the characters. But again, it's one of those things where, like, if I just told you the plot, the storyline, you would be like, "That's a dumb idea for a story," right? It's because it's not about that. It's not about, have I come up with the coolest mystery? Have I come up with the greatest little twist? Right? It's not. It's pretty straightforward, really. It's really, but that's not what it's about. It's about kind of diving into this sort of neighborhood, this little district in outside of London, and it's really seedy, and there's a lot of poverty, and there's a lot of violence, and a lot of criminals, and he just kind of, like, the detective kind of blends into that world. They don't even know he's a detective, right? Um, and just the way he goes about sort of trying to find the answer of, well, who murdered this person. It's always, I think this is the thread that runs throughout all the stories. He picks up the cases where someone's murdered that no one cares about. It's not like a famous person. It's not a rich person. It's not, a sympathy case that makes the news or the headlines, right? It's like some loser guy that no one knew his name. No one cares about him. He was found murdered. So what? We just go on with our life, right? It's a blip. But those are the murders he's investigating. Like, he cares, and he cares about this person's life. And he wants to solve. That's why he wants to solve it, because no one else does, right? So you're getting a lot into the psyche of the detective. Like, what kind of person is like that? Why does he care so much about these people that no one else cares about, right? And that kind of gives him this inroad with these characters he runs into as he's doing the investigation, because he's one of them, right? They understand him. He gets it in a way that no one else in the police department understands. Like, that's the story. That's the novel. It's not whodunit. It's getting to know that character, those characters, and sort of that city, right? That neighborhood.
Well, yeah. It's kind of funny. It's common for people to have an affection for genre fiction when they start out, because it's so irresistible. Like, it has these charms. And then it comes to a point where when you start to write it, you're like, I like the tropes and the cliches more than actual figuring out who done it.
Right.
Like how Robert Mitchum, the hat, the Venetian blinds, the trench coat, it just
The
looks
cigarettes,
cool,
yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And it turned out that's what I liked. Not like figuring out who did it, or like in science fiction, the world building. I don't care about that, right? So it turns out you can take the tropes, the cliches of genre that are a strength. Like in your writing, if you write something that's a cliche, you have to take it out because it's a cliche. But on the other hand, a cliche is a cliche because it's true, right? Cliches have this strength to them, right? So it turns out if you use these tropes, you can just use them as a metonym for something else, or a way to talk about loneliness, for example.
There you go. Yeah.
And basically, this is my thing, but it all comes back to Raymond Chandler, where in the 20th century, people would say genre fiction, that's down here, and literary fiction, that's up here. And then time passed, and people said, well, of course, with the obvious exception of Raymond Chandler.
Right.
And then time passed again, and now there were people like your Philip K. Dick, who are taken very seriously by like Jonathan Lethem, or anyone who's, or like where they can't make that claim. And then people like Thomas Pynchon blurred the lines between genre fiction and literary fiction, where now it's a different world. But it all started with like Raymond Chandler. And basically, Raymond Chandler, he was a commander in World War One, and a bomb was dropped on his company, and everyone died except him.
Mm.
And because of that, that's where the alcoholism and the PTSD and the loneliness came from, right? So when you read his novels, the like twist at the end is like, what? You're working on two cases at the same time, and they were really twin sisters, and one was a movie star. What the hell? That's like the dumb, right? It's brutal. It's brutal, right? And you didn't want to think about it. But then there's this in his book when he's driving his car, and he's like, this used to be an orange grove. Now they turn it down, and it's a donut diner. God damn, right? And you read it, oh man, that's great. That's great. I love it, right?
Yeah.
And that's the power of that, right?
Yeah.
And it's like, Lou Reed, before Lou Reed founded the Velvet Underground, he went to Syracuse University to study writing. And his goal was, he said, I want to be Raymond Chandler, full stop. That's it. That was my goal.
Wow.
Yeah. And it turned out, and I had the same experience. Then it turns out there already is a Raymond Chandler. So Lou Reed had the idea about, what if I took that sensibility and applied it to my world in the Lower East Side with my different concerns, and had the rock music thing combined with what I liked about Raymond Chandler's poetic, deadpan, urban reportage, right?
Mm-hmm.
So then you find this new thing from combining these old things, right? So I had the very same experience of saying, I want to be like this, but what do I do? Then I moved to this city and had these experiences, and some of these, tropes, cliches gave me a lens to analyze them and come up with a different kind of voice. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I think that's such an important thing. I think that is really, that's the thing. It's a shift from, and in some ways you can't help it, right? When you're young, you have your heroes, you have your favorites, right? And then I think of it in terms of music, right? Because I was in a band in college, and, it's like, hey, wow, we got a band, and, I really love this band, so hey, let's write a song like them. We want to sound like them. And so you either become a cover band, and a lot of bands, that's what happens, right? You start off like, we're a cover, like we cover Rush songs. We love Rush.
Yeah.
But then after a while, it's like, yeah, but I want to write my own song. So I might write a song. It maybe it's through the lens of Rush, maybe some of the things I learned from learning their structures and the way they wrote songs. I'll pull that into my song, but eventually it's my own song. It's my own voice, right? And then you stop doing the cover stuff, and you're like, I'm just doing my own thing now, right? And I think that's kind of, it can be a trap as well. I think for any, whether it's painting or drawing or music or poetry or writing, literature or whatever, it's like, you have your favorites and you have your fan. Like, I want to be like I want to be like Philip K. Dick, right?
Mm-hmm.
But then it's like, well, there already is one. So what do I like about this writer? But then I need to make it my own. It has to be my voice. It's got to be like, okay, what am I going to write? Without trying to copy somebody else, right? Trying to be somebody.
And also, if you take your favorite writer and actually do the reverse engineering and figure out why you like him, you'd actually be surprised.
Right.
If you read Philip K. Dick, the gag is a big part of why he was so, he wasn't popular at the time, but why he haunts people now is because he wrote novels about science fiction that had poor people in them.
Yes.
And that was a huge thing. When he was writing, this is so funny. The Jetsons was on TV.
Sure.
Where in the future, there'll be no poverty, rust, decay. You'll have a robot maid who's funny, who cracks jokes.
Yeah.
But he would have Martian colonies where the people had rationing, they had food shortages, and they had unhappy marriages.
Yes.
So and on the surface, there's some stupid monster, whatever it is, stupid. And then, but underneath that, you're like, wow, what if it's true that human nature is immutable and there are some things don't change?
That's
where
right.
if I have an unhappy marriage, we could go to Mars and we'd still have an unhappy marriage.
Exactly.
Right. And, picture a guy who is brought down low because he can't get on top of his desires, his lust and greed. That's the story of Solomon, and it's also the story of Fred McMurray in Double Indemnity. and in
Yeah.
every film noir movie, right?
Yes.
We're 3,000 years apart. That doesn't change, right?
Yes.
So a big reason why Philip K. Dick was a lightning rod was because he had protagonists who had these struggles
Yeah.
where, and I would bet he's pretty much the first who did that, where
Yeah.
he had science fiction protagonists like Rick Decker, who
Yeah.
actually, when they weren't doing the science fiction stuff, he worried about paying bills.
Right. Yeah. And,
Excuse?
and he was concerned about his marriage, right? Were they going to get a
Yeah,
divorce? And things
yeah.
like that. Yeah. So yeah, it's very real. Yes. It's like there's a science fiction candy coating on it, but at its heart, it's a story of just, this could be anybody at any point in time. This could be in the 40s. This could be in the 50s. It could be any time, right?
Yeah. So
Human beings having their life.
yeah, so it might be that someone who's like, man, I like Philip K. Dick, I want to write like him. What you're actually telling yourself isn't, I want to think of some cool science fiction, Hawkwind psychedelic trip, but you want to plug into something that's universal, something that's true, something that doesn't change, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, that's good. That's really good. Well, I tell you what, this hour flew by, man.
Actually, maybe I'll insist on one word rant.
Okay. All right.
Okay, great. So
Walk us
basically,
out with a rant.
okay. So if someone wanted to say that Don Quixote is the best novel ever written, there'd be a lot of good reasons for that, right? And according to Aaron Sorkin's criterion, it's not a good novel. It doesn't have the Aristotelian structure. It doesn't have the payoff, the jibber jabber, right? One of the secret engines in Don Quixote is that when Don Quixote and Sancho Panza talk to each other, they really, really listen. And Don Quixote, he's always earnest. He's never ironic or sarcastic or what do you mean by that? And when they talk to each other, they really listen. So on the one hand, you read this book and you're laughing, but then deep inside, on a nonverbal level, it's like Romeo and Juliet. You read that when you're 14 and you think, man, what if there was someone who loved me so much they couldn't live without me?
Right.
That's why Romeo and Juliet is so timeless, right?
Yeah.
So you read Don Quixote and you think, what if I met someone on planet Earth who really, really listened? Right? Wouldn't that be great to talk to someone and knew they really listened the way those two guys really listened? Okay. So then they go on these adventures. 1,000 pages later, Sancho Panza's friends stage an intervention and say, bro, you got to stop hanging out with this guy. This guy's ruining your life. He sucks.
Yeah.
Okay. So then Sancho Panza, and here's another one of the secret engines why this book is so timeless. Sancho Panza says, I know what those words mean. I understand what you're saying. Your arguments are logical and rational, but I can't take your advice for one reason, and that is I love him.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So then it's like, what if you met someone who loved you like that? Right. So it's like in, Philip K. Dick, Cervantes, Shakespeare, there are flashy bits that people respond to at first glance that are glittering and interesting and smart and clever and show offy, whatever. But then underneath the surface, you're like, wow, what if someone loved me the way Sancho Panza loved him? Right?
Yeah.
What if I met someone who understood? Right?
Yeah.
Like Hamlet says, what is a man if the chief market of his time be but to sleep and feed? Right? So like Hamlet is full of clever bits, more than anything you can imagine. But it also says, what's the meaning of life? Right? Is there more to meaning and to life than eating and shopping? What is this restlessness I have deep inside me? Right? So a novel is like an iceberg, you might say, where it has these different layers of meaning, and you can get rich and win an Oscar from staying on the surface structural level. But if you dig a bit deeper, you'll.
Yeah, exactly. That's so good. Really good. Thank you for that rant. This has been so much fun. I thank you, Darrell, for this conversation. I know this is not the typical thing we talk about in Heretic Happy Hour, but I love this conversation. This is the kind of stuff I love doing. Darrell and I used to do a podcast like this called Imaginary Lines. It's still on YouTube. If you go to the Quarcast, I guess it's on my personal YouTube. So if you go to but if you search for it, Imaginary Lines, Keith Giles, Darrell Epp, you'll find it. Lots more conversations like this. Darrell, thank you so much for having the conversation. Thank you for your wisdom and insight. And we should do it again sometime.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. That was great.
Yeah, very cool.
Okay.
All right, everyone. Thanks for listening. And we'll see you next time.